Hey everyone. Tonight, we're diving into something a bit darker. Plagues, punishments, and plain old pottage. We're going back in time to see what life was really like during the Middle Ages. Forget what you've seen in movies. No shiny castles or noble knights. The truth? You probably wouldn't survive even one day. Before we get started, take a second to like the video and subscribe only if you truly enjoy this kind of content. Also, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is. It's always amazing to see where everyone's tuning in from around the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that cozy background noise, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Congratulations, you've just woken up in the year 1325. The good news? You're alive. The bad news? So are the fleas. You're lying on a straw mattress that smells like a barn floor because, surprise, it was a barn floor just 3 months ago. There's no soft mattress, no pillows, and definitely no clean sheets. Just a scratchy wool blanket that hasn't been washed since last winter and now weighs about as much as a baby cow from all the grime. You blink as the church bell rings in the distance. That's your alarm clock, medieval style. It's loud and impossible to ignore. Your home? It's a one-room wooden shack. No windows, no privacy. Your whole family, a few animals, and a generous helping of bugs all share the space. The smell? Think sour beer, sweaty bodies, goats, and something moldy you really don't want to identify. No air fresheners here. Even if scented candles existed, they'd just melt into the dirt floor. You try to stretch, but instantly regret it. It's freezing. Your joints ache. You're 22, which, in this era, is basically middle-aged. Your back creaks like an old door, and your knees sound like someone shaking a bag of rocks. Getting out of bed is a gamble. Either your floor is soaked from a leaky roof or sticky from something the neighbor's chicken did. Either way, your bare feet are now part of the mess. And privacy? What's that? Everyone in your family, including that cousin who just never left, is waking up next to you. No separate rooms, no curtains, no personal space, just shared everything. Welcome to morning in medieval Europe, where you're never truly alone. There's always a parasite, a rodent, or 8 other people nearby, and that's just how the day starts. You finally manage to get up, and then it hits. You need to go to the bathroom. Not gently either. It's urgent. Here's where you really start to miss the modern toilet. Back then, no toilet. No seat, no toilet paper, no plumbing, not even an annoyed plunger in the corner. For peasants, the bathroom is usually a wooden bucket out back, already full. Because Uncle Wolfstan had a rough night with some bad turnips. The smell is legendary. You hold your breath, do your thing, and then you dump it into the street. Yup, right onto the street. You're supposed to yell "Gardez-vous," which is Old French for "watch out below," before tossing it out the window. But let's be honest, nobody moves fast enough. Medieval streets? Basically rivers of human waste, animal droppings, and fluids you don't even want to think about. Live in a town with public toilets? Lucky you. That means sitting shoulder to shoulder with strangers in a wooden shack. No privacy, no air, maybe a bit of awkward small talk. Just don't breathe too deeply. Toilet paper? Never heard of it. Most people wipe with straw, leaves, old cloth, moss, or if they're feeling fancy, a scrap of wool. Sometimes, they don't use anything at all. Which kind of explains why handshakes weren't really a thing yet. And if you think castle life was cleaner, not exactly. Castles had garderobes, basically holes in the wall where your waist dropped straight into the moat. Great idea. until enemies found out. Yep, attackers sometimes climbed in through those holes. Talk about getting in the back way. Whether you're a farmer or a noble, going to the bathroom in the 14th century was cold, gross, public, and risky. One slip on a whetstone path and you're face first in last night's leftovers, and you still haven't brushed your teeth. But don't worry, we'll get to that part next. You survived the toilet ordeal. Feels like you've earned a reward, right? Maybe a nice, warm breakfast? Well, think again. This is medieval Europe. Comfort doesn't exist here. Breakfast, if you can even call it that, is anything but enjoyable. Forget eggs Benedict, coffee machines, or trendy avocado toast. Instead, you sit or squat near the fire with a wooden bowl filled with something that looks like it came off a muddy boot. That's your daily portion of pottage, a thick, goopy stew made from whatever you could scrounge up. Grains, root vegetables, and maybe a few beans if you're lucky. It's been boiling in the same pot for days, sometimes weeks, with new stuff just tossed in as it goes. It's not a recipe, it's a never-ending food experiment. On the side, a chunk of rock-hard bread. It's made from rough rye or barley, often mixed with things like ground acorns or even sawdust to stretch the supply. Wheat is for the wealthy. You don't cut this bread, you struggle with it. Thirsty? Don't expect juice or a latte. You're drinking beer. Yes, beer, at 6 a.m. Why? Because the water is full of parasites and disease. So everyone drinks weak ale, even the kids. Nobody likes it, but at least it won't kill you. Immediately. Meat or cheese? That's a rare treat, saved for special days like Sundays or saints' feasts. Only if your lord is feeling generous. Most peasants only taste meat a few times a year. Fruit? Only when it's in season and hasn't already been turned into wine. And spices? Don't even think about it. A pinch of pepper costs more than you'll make in a month. Salt is so valuable, it's locked up. So you chew your gritty bread, sip your flat ale, and try not to think about whether a rat was nibbling your food while you slept. Breakfast doesn't energize you. It just sort of happens to you. Now that you've had your sad excuse for a meal, it's time to get dressed. Not that it helps much. You own exactly one outfit. One. It's a scratchy wool tunic or a rough linen shift that you've worn every day for months, maybe years. There's no such thing as fashion, just survival. You wear it until it falls apart or gives you a skin infection. Underwear? Optional. If you're lucky, you might have a thin linen layer underneath. If not, you're going commando under sweaty, itchy wool, stitched by someone who probably had no clue how to sew properly. There's no washing machine, no soap, and definitely no dry cleaners. Your clothes are stiff, stained, and smell like a compost heap mixed with farm animals. And even if you want to wash them, good luck. You'll have to carry water from the river or a well, heat it over a fire, scrub your tunic with ashes or lye, and then hang it to dry if the sun decides to show up that week. And shoes? If you even have a pair, they're rough leather, barely stitched together, and flatter than a pancake. Most peasants just go barefoot, through mud, manure, sharp stones, and mystery puddles full of diseases. The result? Your skin is miserable. You itch constantly. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs live on your body like it's rent-free housing. Everyone has them, nobles, monks, kids. It's just normal. You'll scratch your armpits with a spoon while talking to the village priest, and no one will think twice. Your scalp is crawling, your skin is red and irritated, and if you get a rash, too bad. There's no cream, no doctor, no help. If you're lucky, it won't get infected. If you're not, that rash becomes your new unwanted sidekick for the next 6 months. Now that you're dressed in discomfort and layered in misery, it's time to step outside. Start grinding yourself into the dirt. Now that you're wrapped in itchy, damp wool, it's time to put on that cheery morning smile. Except you don't, because in the Middle Ages, smiling is risky business. Not emotionally, dentally. There's no toothbrush, no paste, no rinse, no floss. Oral hygiene ranks about as high as regular bathing, which is to say, not at all. Some folks gnaw on sticks or rinse with wine or vinegar, but for the most part, your teeth are in open revolt, and they're losing. By your mid-20s, your smile looks like it belongs in a haunted crypt. Cavities are everywhere. Gums are inflamed. And those stains, that's not food, it's full-on rot. You've got more decay in your mouth than a medieval cellar. Sugar isn't common yet, but it's making appearances among the wealthy. Imported at ridiculous cost, mainly used in pastries or as a symbol of wealth. If you're rich, congrats. You can destroy your teeth faster. If you're poor, no rush. You'll do it the slow, painful way with gritty porridge, hard crusts, and years of chewing rocks disguised as bread. Toothaches, get familiar. They're the medieval background noise, the kind of throbbing pain that makes you consider drinking, praying, or yanking it out with pliers. Not a joke. That was the treatment. Dentists weren't a thing. But barber surgeons? Oh yes. The same guy who trims your hair might pull your molar under candlelight using a rusted hook, and absolutely no anesthesia. Infection? Say hello to fever. Without antibiotics, a toothache can turn septic and kill you. That's right. The same problem that takes you to a pharmacy today could end your life in the 1300s. And good luck on the dating scene. Kissing? Hope you're lucky. Halitosis, chronic bad breath, is universal. If you're single, no one's looking at your teeth. They're checking out your livestock. Your mouth is a war zone, and it's losing badly. Now that your gums are screaming, time to head outside, because your actual job, the one breaking your back, starts now. There's no desk, no coffee break, no upward mobility. Your job, like 90% of the population, survive while working for someone else's comfort. You're a peasant. Congrats. That means you till the land of a lord who doesn't know your name. You rise with the sun and stop only when it sets. Your tools? A wooden hoe, a rusted sickle, and the bones still functioning in your body. No weekends, no breaks, just 6 days a week, sunrise to sunset. Sunday off. Only if you're not harvesting, fending off raiders, or praying over an infected toe turning black. The work is savage. Fields are plowed by hand, unless you're lucky enough to have an ox. You dig, sow, weed, and haul water until your spine is shaped like a question mark. No one asks if you're tired. No one cares about your mental health. And if you're a woman, surprise. You don't just farm. You raise children, clean, cook, spin wool, feed animals, and pretend your husband's lice aren't moving into your pillow. Children join in at age 5. No school, no toys, just a tiny rake in the hope they won't die of the flu. Not a farmer? Maybe you're a blacksmith, tanner, or cooper. Congrats. You now spend your day with fire, chemicals, or guts. Ventilation? Non-existent. Pay? Survival? Benefits? Occasional bleeding. Break a bone? Tough. Get a fever? Drink warm beer and keep going. You can't afford to rest. If you stop, you don't eat. If you don't eat, you're replaced. So you grip your tool, ignore the pain, and keep digging. Because in the Middle Ages, your job isn't a career. It's a drawn-out endurance test. Now that your back's on fire, let's talk weather. In the Middle Ages, seasons aren't gentle changes. They're just new forms of punishment. Winter first. No insulation, no heating, no mercy. Your house is wooden with gaps you could toss a chicken through. Windows? Just cloth, not glass. The hearth fire? Great in theory, but firewood is costly, and collecting sticks from the wrong forest could get you executed. Yes, death by twig theft. So you bundle into your one damp wool tunic, huddle near embers, and still wake with a frozen nose, feet always cold, fingers stiff as iron spikes, like tiny medieval popsicles. Frostbite isn't something you diagnose. It's just bad luck with a side of numb fingers. But hey, summer's here. That's better, right? Wrong. Now your house turns into a slow-roasting clay oven. No breeze, no fan, and definitely no deodorant. You sweat through your itchy layers, but you can't strip down. Modesty is a full-body prison. Show too much skin and you risk scandal, sunburn, bug bites, and someone calling you a heathen. Flies buzz like it's their birthday, drawn to your unwashed pits and last week's goat stew fermenting in the corner. Mosquitoes drone past your ears while you try to sleep. If you can sleep through screaming babies, barking dogs, and your neighbors arguing over turnip theft. In the fields, the sun cooks you alive. No sunscreen, no wide-brimmed hat, unless you tied one together with desperation and straw. And here's the worst part. You still have to work. Heat stroke? That's just having a spell. So it's either frostbite or swamp butt. Take your pick. Your thighs chafe like you've been riding dragons bareback, and your one pair of socks smells like regret. Doesn't matter if it's January or July, your clothes still itch, your meals still suck, and that job that's killing you, still waiting outside. Welcome to medieval climate control. Spoiler, there is none. Thirsty? Want to splash your face or rinse off this historical horror show? Too bad. Water is not your friend. It's trying to kill you quietly. That babbling brook, it's a medieval death trap. Sure, it looks clean, like a scene from a fairy tale. But upstream, someone just dumped a bucket of human waste, or a dead sheep, or both. Every sip is loaded with bacteria, parasites, and microbial mysteries. That's why beer was the drink of choice, even for kids. Not the party kind, though. Small beer, low alcohol, high survival. Boiling the brew killed the nasties in the water. Wine? Only if you're rich enough to afford it and too noble to care about being sober before noon. Bathing? Technically, yes. Realistically? People believed washing opened your pores and invited disease inside, so the filth actually protected you. At least, that's what they told themselves. Communal bathhouses did exist, but quickly turned into centers of gossip, scandal, and medieval extracurriculars. Naturally, the church shut them down, and even if you wanted to bathe, it was an ordeal. Fetch water, boil it, fill a leaking tub, and hope no one else used it first, or worse, after. Rain barrels? Great for storing bird poop and mosquito eggs, so whether it's for drinking, bathing, or watering crops, medieval water is a gamble with death. One sip too bold, and you're spending your final days on a straw mattress, clutching your stomach like it owes you money. So next time you drink from a tap, raise your glass to the medieval peasant. They didn't have hydration. They had hope and dysentery. Stubbed your toe on a rock shaped like disappointment? Guess what, you're sick. You need a doctor. Unfortunately, you live in the Middle Ages, where medicine is just a polite word for legal torture with a holy stamp. Let's talk diagnosis. Whether you've got a fever, rash, broken rib, or early-stage bubonic doom, the cause is always the same: unbalanced humors. According to the era's science, your body is a stew of blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health means keeping the stew nicely stirred. Too hot? Too much blood. Solution? Bloodletting. Yes, let's drain the life out of you to fix your headache. Dull blade, bowl, or a leech with attitude. Take your pick. And who performs this? A doctor? Nope, your local barber. That's right. The guy trimming your bangs is also slicing your veins. And there's more. Getting a haircut and a hemoglobin extraction in one sitting. 2 for 1, baby. That's right. In the Middle Ages, barbers weren't just your go-to for a fresh bowl cut. They also doubled as amateur surgeons. Feel a bit off? Maybe sad or anxious? Clearly you're suffering from an excess of black bile. The cure? Laxatives. Not a prescription or therapy, just a warm herbal purge, possibly followed by public prayers and a cold compress, while everyone around you pretends not to be carving your coffin already. Break a bone or suffer a serious wound? Now you're in real trouble. There's no anesthesia, unless you count passing out from sheer pain. Surgery is performed with knives that haven't seen soap since the last crusade, and the tools are only heated, not for hygiene, but to make them look scarier and remind you of your sins. Antibiotics? Still centuries away. Germ theory? Doesn't exist. The medical consensus is that disease comes from bad air or from God being ticked off at your moral failings. Got a stomachache? Must have been your sinful thoughts. Hope you enjoy confessing while vomiting. If your condition worsens, the treatment gets more creative, more leeches, maybe some ground-up beetles, and a priest muttering last rites just in case. At this point, they're not curing you, they're prepping you for the afterlife. And if, by some divine twist, you survive, everyone agrees it was God's mercy. The doctor gets the credit, the leech gets promoted, and you? You're just grateful your humors have stopped screaming. But hey, you've survived another day of lice, leeches, and labor. Time to eat, right? Don't get excited. You shuffle back to your hovel, stomach growling, praying for something warm and edible. But your dinner? It's probably plotting your death. Food preservation is a fantasy. No fridge, no freezer. Just salt, smoke, or blind faith that cold weather will keep your meat from turning into a biohazard. If you're lucky enough to have meat, it's been hanging for days, wearing a fur coat of flies, steeped in questionable brine, and possibly gnawed on by a rat or two. Bread is the medieval staple, but even that comes with risks. During poor harvests, peasants stretch their flour with bark, sawdust, or straight-up clay, and if it's rye season, surprise! You might be eating ergot, a hallucinogenic fungus that causes spasms, delusions, and sometimes death. Think LSD meets tetanus with extra calories. Vegetables, only in season, which means 90% of your plant intake is turnips. Boiled, mashed, or drowned in pottage, a bubbling mystery sludge that's been simmering in a communal cauldron since your great-grandfather's wake. Fruit is fleeting. Sugar is rare and hoarded by nobles, and dairy is a bacterial roulette. Milk spoils within hours. Butter and cheese last longer, but they're just as risky. Still, it's either that or boiled boot leather. Seasoning? Spices like cinnamon and pepper are worth more than gold. Your average peasant meal tastes like wet burlap and regret, lightly seasoned with onion and despair. And food isn't just a health hazard, it's political. Game animals belong to the Lord. Poach a rabbit, and you could be fined, jailed, or straight up executed. That's right, dinner might get you hanged. So when you sit down beside your fire with a bowl of gray slop, remember, every bite is a test, and if it doesn't kill you now, it's probably plotting something for next week. But it's finally evening. Surely the worst is over. Not quite. You've labored, you've itched, you've choked down fermented stew. Now it's time to unwind, with some mandatory spiritual terror. Religion in the Middle Ages isn't just part of life, it is life. The church controls your calendar, your laws, your literacy, if you're lucky, and your final resting place. Think of it as a divine landlord, and you're always behind on rent. Every day is ruled by prayer bells, morning, noon, and night. Not as a reminder, but as obligation. Miss a prayer? Sin. Eat meat on a Friday? Sin. Have a saucy dream about your neighbor's wife? Double sin. And hell? Oh, it's vividly real. The priests describe it in high-definition horror. Rivers of fire, lakes of boiling blood, screaming demons with pitchforks. Eternal torment is not a metaphor. It's a lesson plan, and you can't even fact-check any of it because the Bible is written in Latin, a language reserved for clergy and that one noble kid with a harp. The church interprets everything. Crops failed? Pray harder. Plague hit your village? Should have tithed more. Speaking of tithes, you owe the church 10% of everything. Wheat, eggs, livestock. If you have nothing, congratulations. You're spiritually bankrupt and financially doomed. Holidays are holy days, not breaks. They involve mass, fasting, confession, and remembering that happiness is a slippery slope toward damnation. Question the church? Enjoy being labeled a heretic. Blasphemers are flogged, witches are drowned, and skeptics are reformed by fire. So you go through the motions, chant, bow, kneel, hoping that after this dirt-caked life, your soul might reach paradise, assuming the priest thinks you're worthy. Now imagine doing all of this as a woman. Same lice, same famine, same disease, plus childbirth, submission, and total invisibility. Being a woman in the Middle Ages is playing life on hard mode with no health potions and no save points. From birth, your path is locked. Marry young, bear children, serve your husband, die tired. Education? Only if you're noble and sent to a convent. Otherwise, your intellectual development peaks at butter churning and patch mending. Marriage? Happens early, like 12 years old early, pregnant at 14. It's not about love. It's about land, alliances, and livestock. Your opinion isn't required. Once married, you're your husband's legal property. Your job is to produce sons, feed the household, and not complain. Because complaining might get you branded a nag, or worse, a witch. That label comes with a complimentary drowning or burning, depending on the village mood. And childbirth? It's a death lottery. No prenatal care, no sterile tools, no pain relief. Midwives do their best, but even minor complications can mean death for the mother, the child, or both. Some women survive 10 pregnancies. Many don't survive 2. But if you live, congratulations. Now you get to raise a baby in a lice-infested hut while still cooking, cleaning, and dodging accusations of sorcery. Because in the Middle Ages, a woman with opinions, herbal knowledge, or just too many cats could be accused of witchcraft and sentenced to a very public, very smoky end. You were the nurse, the cook, the cleaner, and when all that was done, you still helped harvest the fields. There were no breaks for you. You were the break for everyone else, the one expected to absorb the pressure, hold the world together, and smile while doing it. If you were unmarried, you were suspicious. If widowed, you were vulnerable. If you dared to be outspoken, you were dangerous. And if you didn't conform, if you had herbal knowledge, a strong will, or simply gave someone the wrong look on a rainy Tuesday, you could be branded a witch. That label wasn't metaphorical. It was deadly. Even in religion, the supposed sanctuary, your worth was limited. Nuns lived under strict surveillance, no speaking without permission, no freedom of movement, and always spiritually subordinate to men. The church preached salvation, but practiced hierarchy. If you were a woman in the Middle Ages, your role was clear. Obey, reproduce, suffer, and do it all quietly, ideally with a gentle smile, and as if the crushing daily labor, hunger, and unending childbirth weren't enough, violence lurked around every corner, loud, bloody, and normalized. The Middle Ages weren't peaceful. They were a battleground where justice meant hoping the local lord wasn't in a foul mood. Violence didn't break society. It was society. In the home, husbands were legally permitted, expected even, to discipline their wives and children. In the streets, fights were common, punishment was barbaric, and public executions drew crowds as if they were festivals. You could be maimed or mutilated for stealing a loaf of bread. Wear the wrong expression, risk public humiliation with a scold's bridle, a metal mask strapped to your face as punishment for talking too much. If accused of heresy, theft, or witchcraft, proving your innocence was torture, literally. Trial by ordeal might require you to plunge your hand into boiling water and retrieve a stone. If it healed without infection in 3 days, congratulations, you were innocent. If not, guilty, or you might be thrown into a river. Sink, you're innocent, but dead. Float, guilty. It's a game with no winning, only surviving. Executions were communal. Hanging, burning, beheading, performed before cheering mobs, children on shoulders, snacks in hand. Death was not private. It was a performance, a warning. And if violence didn't get you, disease might, or childbirth, or famine. If you lived past 40, you were a statistical miracle, referred to as the old one, less a compliment than a curiosity. Half of all children died before age 5. If you survived childhood, you entered adulthood already bent by labor and ravaged by malnutrition. By 25, you might be missing teeth, a finger, and most of your original hope. For women, childbirth was a death sentence with a 9-month countdown. No anesthesia, no sanitation, no medical intervention. Just prayers, blood, and hot water in a straw-stuffed cot. For men, death came from different angles: farming accidents, infected wounds, drunken neighbors, or a crusade that ended in a muddy field under a foreign sky. Even walking to market could be fatal. One step in front of a noble's horse, or into the path of a tax collector having a bad day could spell your end. Plague could sweep through in the night, turning cities into morgues. A single bad winter could starve entire villages. Spoiled grain could drive you mad before it killed you. And when you died, you were lucky if anyone noticed. No embalming, no velvet-lined coffin, just a hole in the earth, a shallow mound, and a prayer, if the priest was available. Often, bodies were buried quickly and anonymously before they could infect the living. So no, the Middle Ages were not some golden era of chivalry and romance. They were a gauntlet of survival. You didn't retire. You just stopped showing up. If you've made it through lice, leeches, hunger, violence, and humiliation, congratulations. But now comes your final chapter. Death, quiet, grim, and inevitable, still dreaming of becoming a knight, of candlelit feasts, noble deeds, and fair maidens in silk? Think again. That glittering vision is a fairy tale, a sanitized myth. In reality, castles were cold, smoke-filled stone boxes crawling with vermin. Nobility didn't mean safety, just more responsibility, more threats, and more political marriages to people you loathed. You had a fur cloak, yes, and wine, but also a 50-50 chance of dying from an infected splinter or bad soup. These weren't simpler times. They were harsher. Everything was slower, heavier, and more dangerous. Chewing could break your teeth. Giving birth could end your life. Being poor could get you killed. Being rich could make you a target. There was no internet to Google a weird rash. No medicine to stop an infection. no hotline to call when you were afraid. You lived, suffered, and died often within 10 miles of where you were born. And yet, despite it all, people still found ways to laugh, to fall in love, to sing songs, tell stories, and dream of something better. Not because life was easy, but because humans are stubborn. We insist on hope, even when the world offers none. So tonight, when you slip under clean sheets in a warm room with antibiotics in the cabinet and a lock on your door, say a quiet thank you to modern medicine, to progress, and to every stubborn soul who once fought famine, disease, and injustice so you wouldn't have to. Catherine had always known that the Russian throne would not be handed to her. It would have to be taken, and she planned for that day with patience, cunning, and relentless determination. For nearly 2 decades, she waited, observing the court, studying its politics, and quietly building alliances. Then, in 1762, her moment arrived. Empress Elizabeth had died, and Catherine's husband, Peter, ascended the throne as Peter III. But what should have been a secure reign quickly spiraled into disaster. Within months, Peter managed to alienate nearly every power base in Russia. He offended the Orthodox Church, insulted the powerful nobility, and infuriated the army. His admiration for Frederick the Great and the Kingdom of Prussia, a traditional enemy of Russia, was openly proclaimed. He reversed key Russian policies, mocked the clergy, and made no secret of his intention to divorce Catherine and marry his mistress. Discontent simmered at every level. The court turned cold. The nobility, wary of Peter's erratic behavior, began whispering behind closed doors. The army, populated with senior officers fiercely loyal to Catherine, grumbled with growing unrest. And among the Russian people, Peter was seen as a foreign puppet, a ruler who disrespected their faith and national pride. Catherine, ever watchful, seized the opportunity. In July of 1762, while Peter was away at his summer palace, Catherine launched a bold and bloodless coup d'etat. With the support of key military officers, chief among them, her lover, Grigory Orlov, and his influential brothers, she rode through St. Petersburg in full imperial regalia. The Imperial Guard pledged their allegiance to her, and Catherine was publicly declared Empress Catherine II of Russia. Peter, caught entirely off guard and abandoned by his allies, surrendered without resistance. Within days, he was taken into custody. Shortly afterward, he died under mysterious circumstances. Official reports attributed his death to hemorrhoidal colic, but few believed it. In reality, it was almost certainly murder. Catherine was now empress, not by birthright, not by marriage, but through sheer will, intelligence, and audacity. A foreign-born woman with no direct claim to the throne had seized power in one of the most conservative and patriarchal empires in the world, without a single battle. But the real challenge lay ahead. She would now have to turn her extraordinary act of ambition into a legitimate and lasting rule. Would the nobility accept her? Could she earn the loyalty of a fractured court and a suspicious populace? Could she hold the vast Russian Empire together without meeting the same grim end as her husband? Catherine understood better than anyone that power gained through conspiracy could be lost just as easily. So, she transformed herself from a calculating conspirator into a monarch of vision and reform. Rather than merely holding on to the throne, Catherine sought to elevate Russia itself, not just in terms of military strength or political power, but intellectually, culturally, and morally. Where Peter had worshipped Prussian discipline and paraded toy soldiers, Catherine was enthralled by the ideas of the Enlightenment. She admired the great philosophers of her age, Voltaire, Diderot, and Montesquieu. and believed deeply in the principles of reason, progress, and education. Catherine didn't just read Enlightenment texts, she lived them. She corresponded with Voltaire for over 15 years, charming him with flattery while defending her autocracy. She invited Diderot to her court, offered him patronage, and even purchased his entire library to support him financially. Behind closed doors, Catherine immersed herself in political theory, legal texts, and reform strategies. She wasn't just a ruler, she was a scholar. One of her most ambitious initiatives came in 1767 with the formation of the Legislative Commission, a nationwide project to overhaul Russia's outdated and chaotic legal code. Catherine's nakaz, her written instruction to the commission, was a revolutionary political document. In it, she advocated for equality before the law, the abolition of torture, and the idea that sovereigns had a moral obligation to serve their people. Radical ideas, especially for 18th century Russia. But Catherine was also a realist. She understood that Russia was a feudal empire with a deeply conservative aristocracy. Reform could not come at the cost of stability. While she pushed for greater access to education, the reduction of torture, and the creation of secular schools and libraries, she also ensured that the nobility retained control over their serfs, a painful compromise that kept the empire's elite in her favor. It was a delicate balancing act, enlightened thinker in public, pragmatic ruler in private, a philosopher queen in Parisian correspondence, a shrewd empress in the grim halls of Moscow. Catherine's vision was not to make Russia European, but to make it modern on her own terms. And modern Russia, as she saw it, would not only reform from within, but expand outward. She had no intention of limiting her influence to the palace or the classroom. She wanted an empire that commanded respect, fear, and admiration across the globe. Under her reign, Russia's territory expanded dramatically. She waged wars not merely to defend her crown, but to reshape the geopolitical landscape of Europe. Her most significant military campaigns were waged against the Ottoman Empire throughout the 1760s and 1770s. These wars were not only about acquiring land, they were about asserting cultural and religious influence. Catherine portrayed herself as the liberator of Orthodox Christians under Muslim rule and the rightful protector of Eastern Europe. Under the command of brilliant generals like Alexander Suvorov and Grigory Potemkin, Russian forces seized Crimea, secured the northern coast of the Black Sea, and obtained access to warm water ports, long a strategic goal of Russian rulers. For generations, Russian rulers had dreamed of access to warm water ports. Catherine the Great made that dream a reality. Her military victories weren't just conquests, they were powerful symbols. Each triumph sent a clear message to the rest of Europe. Russia was no longer a distant, backward empire on the edge of the continent. It had arrived as a formidable European power. But Catherine's ambitions didn't stop in the south. She turned her attention westward. Through a series of strategic alliances and calculated diplomatic moves, she played a central role in the partitions of Poland. Alongside Austria and Prussia, Catherine oversaw the gradual dismemberment of the weakened Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. By 1795, after the third and final partition, Poland had vanished from the map. Russia emerged from the process with vast new territories and millions of new subjects. Yet, Catherine didn't rely solely on military strength to build her empire. She colonized with vision and ideas. She ordered the construction of new cities, expanded trade networks, and invited foreign settlers, especially Germans, to cultivate the Russian frontier. Under her rule, the empire transformed into a vast mosaic, stretching from the icy shores of the Baltic Sea to the sun-drenched coastline of the Black Sea. Catherine was the beating heart of this expansion. She read every report, issued countless orders, and stayed intimately involved in every aspect of governance. Critics often labeled her a power-hungry imperialist, but in Catherine's eyes, territorial growth wasn't about personal ambition. It was her duty, her destiny. To her, the greatness of a ruler wasn't measured only by philosophy or reform, but by the physical expanse of the empire they left behind. She didn't want to merely rule Russia. She aimed to remake it. A civilized empire, strong enough to command fear from its enemies, win respect from its peers, and demand unwavering loyalty from its people. But even as she carved out a powerful empire, Catherine's personal life was the subject of endless intrigue, often overshadowing her political achievements. Behind the gilded palace walls, her romantic affairs became one of the most discussed and scandalized aspects of her reign. Catherine had lovers, many of them, not one or two, but a carefully selected series of companions, often decades younger, attractive, and frequently politically astute. She made no effort to conceal them. In fact, she frequently rewarded them with noble titles, lands, and pensions. Those who pleased her were treated with generosity. Those who didn't were dismissed quietly, sometimes with a promotion and a polite farewell. Among these men, one stood out above all, Grigory Potemkin. Bold, brilliant, and fiercely loyal, Potemkin was more than a lover. He was Catherine's closest partner in politics, military affairs, and empire building. Some historians even speculate that they may have secretly married. Together, they spearheaded military campaigns, orchestrated colonization efforts, and reimagined Russia's presence in the southern regions. Potemkin was a co-ruler in all but name. Still, Europe couldn't look past the scandal. Satirical pamphlets ridiculed Catherine. Whispers about her private life swirled through salons and royal courts. After her death, the gossip only grew darker. The most infamous accusation, a grotesque and entirely false rumor involving a horse, was spread by her political enemies, eager to tarnish her legacy. Why such obsession? The answer is simple. Catherine was a woman who held power without apology. In a world that demanded women be either virtuous saints or tragic victims, she was neither. She ruled, she loved, and she lived on her own terms, and that made her threatening. Ironically, the woman who was painted as immoral was, in fact, deeply philosophical about love, power, and sexuality. Catherine believed that pleasure was a natural part of human existence. She saw no contradiction between her personal desires and her public responsibilities. While many male rulers let emotion interfere with governance, Catherine separated the two with precision. Her romantic relationships were often strategic. She surrounded herself with men who were not only loyal but politically useful. When their usefulness ended, she let them go, gracefully, and usually with a handsome reward. Her personal life didn't undermine her rule. It complemented it. For Catherine, love and leadership were part of the same game, one she played better than anyone else. But even a ruler as commanding as Catherine was not immune to crisis. In 1773, the empire faced a grave threat, not from abroad, but from within. It came in the form of a ragged Cossack named Yemelyan Pugachev. And he wasn't just leading a rebellion, he claimed to be something far more dangerous. He said he was Peter III, Catherine's dead husband, back from the grave. He claimed he had survived the coup and returned to reclaim his rightful place on the throne from the so-called German usurper. The accusation was absurd. Peter III had been dead for years. But in 18th century Russia, truth wasn't the only currency. To the peasants, Cossacks, and disillusioned masses, Pugachev's claim didn't need to be factual. It simply had to be believable. And more importantly, it had to offer hope. Pugachev promised sweeping change, the end of serfdom, lower taxes, and land for the common folk. To the oppressed and impoverished, these weren't just promises, they were salvation. His message ignited a blaze of rebellion across the Volga River basin, especially among disenfranchised groups like the Old Believers, Cossacks, and rural peasants who had long suffered under the weight of nobility. The result was the largest peasant uprising in Russian history. Towns fell, fortresses were seized, nobles were slaughtered. For a terrifying moment, the foundations of the empire trembled. This wasn't a war Catherine could fight with diplomacy and distant armies. It was an uprising from within, a direct challenge to the very system she governed. Catherine was rattled, but she did not falter. She mobilized the imperial army, deploying professional troops to crush the rebellion with ruthless precision. By 1774, Pugachev's forces were defeated. He was captured, paraded through the streets of Moscow in an iron cage, and publicly executed, beheaded in front of a crowd as a chilling message to any who might dare to rise up. The rebellion left scars. Catherine, once a champion of Enlightenment principles, hardened. Her earlier visions of liberating the serfs quietly vanished. The uprising had exposed a brutal truth. Russia was not ready for idealistic reforms imposed from above. The deep chasm between the nobility and the serfs made radical change dangerous. In response, Catherine doubled down. She reinforced the power of the nobility, granting them even greater control over their serfs in exchange for unwavering loyalty. Enlightenment gave way to pragmatism. Philosophy was replaced with surveillance. Rebellion, even the whisper of it, was to be extinguished before it could ignite. Pugachev lost his life, but his revolt served as an enduring warning. Empires built on inequality rest on unstable ground. Catherine never forgot that storm. The final years of Catherine the Great. By the twilight of her reign, Catherine had ruled Russia for more than 30 years, longer than any female monarch in Russian history. From the moment she seized power in 1762, she had defied every expectation, reshaping her empire and redefining what a woman in power could be. Under her leadership, Russia transformed into a true European heavyweight. The empire expanded by over 200,000 square miles, including strategic territories like Crimea, large swaths of Poland, and the Black Sea coast. These weren't merely military victories, they were strategic masterstrokes that secured warm water ports and reoriented trade and naval power. But her impact wasn't limited to war and borders. Catherine became a patron of culture and intellect. She helped establish the Hermitage Museum and amassed one of Europe's most formidable art collections. She corresponded with Enlightenment philosophers like Voltaire and Diderot, bringing their ideas into her court. Under her influence, Russia began to shed its image as Europe's backward cousin and stepped into the spotlight as a center of sophistication and learning. She modernized education, founding schools for girls and promoting the publication of books. In a bold display of scientific progress, she championed smallpox inoculation, going so far as to receive the vaccine publicly, a radical act of leadership and trust in science for her era. Yet, Catherine's reign was not without contradictions. While she spoke the language of enlightenment and admired its ideals, she stopped short of freeing the serfs. In fact, she extended serfdom deeper into Russia's frontier regions. Her reforms often came from the top down, designed to modernize the empire's image without dismantling its feudal foundations. Despite these tensions, Catherine's rule brought stability, prosperity, and ambition. She understood that power wasn't bestowed, it was built, defended, and carefully managed. She ruled not by divine right, but by intellect, charm, and an iron will. Catherine the Great remains one of history's most fascinating rulers, a woman who reimagined an empire, navigated treacherous politics, and lived by her own rules in a world that rarely allowed women to do so. Catherine the Great was many things, called a schemer, a tyrant, a seductress, a reformer, but above all, she was effective. Ruthlessly intelligent and politically shrewd, she ruled with a rare mix of grace and calculation. When she died in 1796, Russia was not only richer and larger than it had been in centuries, it was stronger, more cultured, and feared across Europe. She left behind not just a secure throne, but an empire expanded, and a legend that would outlast marble statues and gilded portraits. Catherine didn't simply wear the crown, she redefined what it meant to hold one. Her reign wasn't inherited, it was seized, shaped, and relentlessly defended. Through political skill and personal charisma, she carved a space for herself in a world that doubted a woman's capacity to rule. And in doing so, she became something more than an empress. She became a myth. Yet behind the grandeur and myth-making was a woman navigating a man's world with surgical precision. She was not born Russian. She rose to power through a coup, overthrew her own husband, and ruled an empire that had little interest in being led by a foreign-born woman. Still, she didn't just survive, she dominated. She studied constantly, wrote obsessively, and refused to be ornamental. Her days were packed with reading reports, drafting policies, managing foreign correspondence, and navigating the treacherous waters of court politics. Catherine was not content to be a symbol. She worked like a stateswoman molded for leadership. Despite her power, there was loneliness. Surrounded by courtiers, lovers, philosophers, and artists, Catherine confided in her memoirs that trust was a rare commodity. Her son Paul, whom she kept distant from the levers of power, grew into a man she deeply distrusted, a potential heir who might undo her life's work. Her greatest emotional anchor, Prince Grigory Potemkin, evolved from a lover into a lifelong confidant. His death in 1791 left a deep scar, one that never fully healed. Catherine understood the importance of image. She mastered the art of narrative long before modern propaganda. She styled herself as the enlightened sovereign, the mother of Russia, the patroness of the arts, and the warrior empress. She orchestrated her own mythology with the same care she applied to foreign policy. But beneath the masks, there lived a woman who endured betrayal, scandal, rebellion, and rose stronger each time. Her legacy is filled with contradictions. She championed Enlightenment ideals and corresponded with Voltaire and Diderot, yet she extended serfdom rather than abolishing it. She modernized Russian education, even founding schools for girls, but kept real power centralized and reform tightly controlled. She introduced smallpox inoculation and scientific thinking to the empire, even publicly receiving the vaccine herself, a bold act in a time of medical fear and superstition. In the end, Catherine's greatness wasn't in her perfection, but in her determination. She didn't flinch when challenged, nor did she yield to the limitations society placed on her gender. She ruled for more than 3 decades, longer than any female ruler in Russian history, and she did so with a relentless will to expand, strengthen, and elevate Russia on the world stage. When she died, questions lingered. Could she have done more for the oppressed? Had she compromised too much for the sake of control? Was she more a ruler than a reformer? History never got a chance to ask her. It simply crowned her with a title she never claimed for herself: the Great. Not because she was flawless or benevolent, but because she took power and wielded it on her own terms, in a world where women were meant to be silent. Catherine didn't just reign, she rewrote the very rules of rulership. She didn't just inherit history, she bent it to her will. Everything about the burial spoke of royalty, of reverence, of power, of someone not merely remembered, but exalted. And yet, there was no name, no glyphs, no inscriptions to tell us who she was, no stele to boast of her deeds, only a mystery wrapped in crimson dust. It was one of the most lavish female burials ever discovered in all of Mesoamerica, and yet it raised more questions than answers. Why the secrecy? Why no record? Why such care and opulence, only to leave her identity a secret? Whoever she was, queen, high priestess, consort of a king, or a ruler in her own right, her legacy was sealed in silence. Archaeologists would come to call her the Red Queen, and the name, like the enigma she left behind, would remain. The tomb was discovered in 1994 beneath Temple 13 at Palenque, nestled in the humid jungles of Chiapas, Mexico. Unlike most Maya burials, hers had been hidden, deliberately isolated, untouched by looters, protected by time. This was no ordinary interment. It was ceremonial, yes, but more than that, it was spiritual. Her burial was not designed to glorify her in text. It was designed to transform her through ritual, through mystery, through color, through sacred substance. The most haunting feature of her tomb was not the jade jewelry or the eerie stillness of the sealed chamber. It was the dust. A deep, vibrant red layer of powdered cinnabar, crushed mercury sulfide, coated everything. It clung to the sarcophagus, the walls, her bones, even the offerings around her. It stained the stone like dried blood. And it was no accident. To the ancient Maya, cinnabar was not merely a pigment. It was sacred. Its bright, unearthly hue represented blood, sacrifice, rebirth, and divine essence. Red was the color of the rising sun, the spilled blood of rituals, and the sacred life force that flowed between the mortal and the divine. In the Maya worldview, death was not an end. It was a transformation, a crossing into another layer of the cosmos. To be buried in cinnabar was to be ritually reborn. The Red Queen was being prepared not just for death, but for deification. But cinnabar held another secret, one the Maya may have sensed even if they couldn't explain it. It was toxic, laced with mercury. Prolonged exposure caused tremors, hallucinations, and even death. It was powerful, volatile, otherworldly. Those who were bathed in it were marked as exceptional. In Palenque, only one other burial had been given this dangerous honor. Pakal the Great, the mighty king whose name still echoes through the carved stones of the city. His tomb, the grand temple of the inscriptions, sat not far from hers. His body, like hers, was also drenched in cinnabar. This one detail sent waves of speculation through the academic world. Was the Red Queen his consort, his mother, a ruler in her own right? The sacred red dust hinted that whoever she was, she stood beside kings, if not above them. Her body told other stories. Her skull had been laid upon jaguar skin, a potent symbol of the underworld, of divine power and royal authority. Surrounding her were ritual objects, bone needles, obsidian blades, and miniature jade figurines, tools of ceremony, perhaps used during her life or placed to guide her in the afterlife. Every item was deliberate, every placement sacred. No words were left behind, but her burial spoke. Through silence, through symbols, through color. Jade glinted in the tomb's dim light, untouched by centuries. Necklaces, diadems, earrings, and bracelets, crafted from jade and shell, were placed carefully around her. These were not adornments. They were offerings, tokens for the journey into Xibalba, the Maya underworld, Jade, to the Maya, was more than precious. It was eternal. It represented the green of maize, the breath of life, the pulse of nature itself. Only the elite, the most sacred among the dead, were buried with jade. The Red Queen's chest, wrists, and ears were adorned with it. Her face was covered with a delicate jade mask, still intact. The placement was ceremonial, a spiritual armor for the soul. These offerings were meant not to preserve her memory, but to prepare her essence, to empower her for the cosmic journey that lay ahead. Her tomb remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of ancient Mesoamerica. She was interred with the reverence of a goddess, yet her name was erased or never recorded. Perhaps that was the point. Perhaps her transformation into the divine required the shedding of identity. Or perhaps her story was meant to live in the questions she left behind. She lies now in silence, surrounded by sacred stone, brilliant jade, and the haunting red dust that gave her a name. Not a queen in title, but one in ritual, in power, and in the legacy that still captivates the world. She is the Red Queen, and her mystery endures. In life, she wielded power, perhaps even divine favor. Everything about her burial spoke to influence, status, and sacredness. But among the many ritual objects entombed with her, one stood out as especially haunting. A jade funerary mask carefully placed over her face. Unlike the grand golden death masks of ancient Egypt, this one was subtle, intimate. Composed of dozens of finely carved jade mosaic tiles, it was meticulously fitted to trace the delicate contours of her skull. The mask was not just an artistic masterpiece. It was a sacred object. It was meant to preserve her identity, to guard her soul, and to present her as divine in the eyes of the gods she was now journeying toward. Scattered around her skeletal remains were bone needles, obsidian blades, and delicate shell artifacts. These were not randomly included grave goods. They were deeply symbolic. They might have been tools of her spiritual practice, indicators that she was not only of noble blood, but also perhaps a priestess, healer, or royal matriarch. One bone pin, faintly engraved, whispered a trace of her voice, a small, silent message lost to the centuries, but undeniably intentional. Ceramic vessels, still sealed after more than a millennium, were found at her feet and along the edges of the tomb. They likely held food, drink, or sacred incense, offerings not for comfort, but for survival. The Maya believed that death was not an end, but the beginning of a perilous journey through the underworld, Xibalba. These vessels were provisions for the voyage ahead, as vital to the soul as air is to the living. To a modern eye, the Red Queen's tomb might appear understated. There was no gold, no lavish chariots or sprawling wealth. But it was not sparse. It was purposeful. Each object held spiritual weight. Her burial wasn't designed to showcase power through material riches. It was a spiritual map, carefully composed to guide her transformation from mortal to divine. And yet, for all the grandeur of her burial, one haunting absence lingered. Her name. No inscription adorned her sarcophagus. No glyphs were etched into the walls to proclaim her identity. She had been buried in sacred ceremony and surrounded by potent symbols, but her name was left behind, deliberately or through time's erasure. From the moment her tomb was discovered, researchers began searching for her true identity. The most compelling theory emerged, that she was Queen Sakbu Ajau, the wife of Kinich Janab Pakal, known today as Pakal the Great, the most legendary ruler of Palanque. Sakbu wasn't just Pakal's consort. She was born of noble blood and married into the Palanque dynasty at a young age. She bore 3 sons, each of whom would ascend to positions of power and played a vital ceremonial role during her husband's reign. If anyone deserved to be buried with such reverence, it was her. Supporting this theory is the tomb's location, just meters from Pakal's own burial chamber beneath the Temple of the Inscriptions. The proximity was no accident. It suggests a deliberate and sacred pairing, king and queen united even in death. There's also the unmistakable presence of cinnabar. Only 2 burials in Palanque were saturated in the vivid red powder, Pakal and the Red Queen. The substance was more than just decoration. Made from mercury sulfide, cinnabar was sacred to the Maya, symbolizing blood, transformation, and divine rebirth. Its inclusion signaled not only honor, but a spiritual metamorphosis. It wasn't just a marker of death, it was an alchemical agent of transcendence. Covering the dead in cinnabar was a way to preserve them, not merely in body, but in spirit. To handle such a substance was dangerous. Modern science tells us that prolonged exposure can lead to mercury poisoning, hallucinations, and even death. The Maya may not have known its chemistry, but they knew its power. To use it in a burial was to declare that the person within was no ordinary mortal. DNA tests were eventually conducted on both sets of remains, those of Pakal and the Red Queen, in hopes of confirming a biological connection. The results were inconclusive. They showed no direct maternal link between the two, but that didn't rule out a spousal relationship. After all, marriage is a union of spirit, not necessarily of blood. Some scholars have argued that the Red Queen may not have been Sakbu at all. Perhaps she was Sak Kauk, Pakal's mother, who ruled Palanque as queen regent until her son came of age, a powerful woman in her own right. Others suggest she could have been a high priestess, a sister, or a revered royal ancestor whose name has simply been erased by time's relentless erosion. But the evidence, her proximity to Pakal, the use of cinnabar, the grandeur of the tomb, continues to point most convincingly to Queen Sakbu. And perhaps the lack of a name wasn't an oversight. In Maya cosmology, immortality didn't come from monuments or inscriptions. It came from ritual, from memory, from the sacred cycles of death and rebirth. A soul lived on not through stone, but through color, symbol, and the breath of the earth itself. To truly understand the Red Queen, we must understand the world she emerged from, a world where Maya royal women held immense, often underestimated power. In Maya civilization, politics was deeply familial. Royal women were not passive consorts, but active agents of power, diplomats, priestesses, and matriarchs. They conducted sacred rituals, founded dynasties, and ruled empires. Their bloodlines were vital currency, forging political alliances and securing dynastic legitimacy. Sak Kuk, Pakal's mother, is a striking example. When Palanque's throne sat vacant, she seized the reins of power and ruled as queen, issuing decrees and overseeing temple construction until her son could take the throne. Without her, Pakal might never have risen to greatness. She was no exception. Across the Maya world, in cities like Yaxchilan, Naranjo, and Calakmul, inscriptions and murals depict royal women performing major ceremonies, engaging in diplomacy, and even waging war. They appear in carved stelae and painted frescoes, adorned in elaborate headdresses and regalia, often standing as equals beside kings, or above them. But time is a cruel editor. By the time Spanish conquistadors arrived, many of these stories had been lost. Colonial narratives painted indigenous women as silent, submissive figures in a male-dominated world. Yet archaeology tells another story, a story of complexity, agency, and power shared between the sexes. And so, the Red Queen remains, nameless, voiceless, but not forgotten. Shrouded in cinnabar and mystery, she rests in a tomb that whispers not of death, but of transformation. She was not buried to be remembered in stone, but to ascend through ritual, through legacy, and through the haunting silence of sacred scarlet. This broader context casts the Red Queen in a powerful and transformative light. Though she may not have ruled by formal title, the evidence of her burial, sacred, lavish, and intimately placed beside the tomb of Kinich Janab Pakal, or Pakal the Great, suggests she was not merely a royal companion, but a foundational figure within the Maya royal order. Her jade funerary mask was far more than an ornament. It was a vessel of spiritual identity, a sacred shield designed to preserve her essence, assert her divinity, and maintain her power even in death. In Maya civilization, queens were not passive figures. They were keepers of sacred bloodlines, spiritual intermediaries, and often critical players in governance and ritual. The Red Queen's lineage may well have been the glue binding Palank's dynastic structure together. Her role likely extended far beyond that of a consort, into the realm of ceremony, politics, and divine mediation. She may be nameless to us now, but in her time, her presence was a powerful voice in the rituals that shaped the Maya world. Her tomb speaks volumes, not just through its contents, but through its architecture, rich with purpose, layered in cosmological meaning, and constructed with reverent intention. This was not a burial site in the ordinary sense. It was a metaphysical threshold, a carefully orchestrated gateway to eternity. Her body was discovered within Temple 13, a smaller pyramid nestled within the sacred heart of Palank, yet positioned in striking proximity to the monumental Temple of the Inscriptions, the final resting place of Pakal the Great. Such placement was deliberate. Maya temples were not built arbitrarily. Their orientation and arrangement were dictated by astronomical alignments, cosmological beliefs, and dynastic strategy. While Temple 13 rises more modestly than its grand neighbor, it conceals something perhaps more intimate, a sealed crypt, untouched by looters and remarkably preserved. Buried deep within the pyramid's core and reachable only by a steep, narrow descent, the tomb's architecture evokes a symbolic journey, a ritualistic descent into Xibalba, the Maya underworld. Inside, the tomb is austere. Cut from limestone and sealed in silence for over 11 centuries, it bears no wall carvings or painted glyphs. But this absence of visual storytelling may itself be meaningful. The space was not created for the eyes of the living, but for the soul of the dead to undergo its sacred transformation. At the center lies her sarcophagus, a limestone altar echoing the grandeur of Pakal's own resting place. Yet, where his tomb is covered in detailed carvings of cosmic rebirth, hers is reserved, focused inward on the body, the ritual, and the sanctity of death. Subtle architectural cues hint at deeper meaning. The tomb is aligned along an east-west axis, mirroring the sun's path across the sky, from birth in the east to death in the west, a cosmic metaphor for the soul's own journey. Though the chamber is small, it feels deliberate, profound, and deeply personal. To be buried within a Maya temple was not a passive honor. It was a spiritual elevation, a declaration of one's divine nature. The Red Queen's burial wasn't an afterthought. It was a shrine, a sanctified enclosure where death became metamorphosis. Her remains rest in stone, her soul enshrined in the crimson dust of cinnabar, her legacy immortalized not in inscription, but in sacred geometry. In the worldview of the ancient Maya, death was not an end, but a sacred passage, an initiation into the divine realms of the underworld, known as Xibalba. For someone of the Red Queen's standing, this journey was both spiritual and ceremonial, a transition as much about cosmological duty as it was about personal transformation. Burial rituals were not mere customs. They were elaborate events deeply rooted in mythological frameworks designed to guide the soul through a complex and perilous afterlife. Xibalba was no serene paradise. It was a shadowy realm of blood-filled rivers, trials by fire, and gods of death. Only those properly buried, ritually prepared, and spiritually empowered could navigate its treacherous terrain. The Red Queen's burial reflects such careful preparation. Her body was wrapped in cinnabar, a substance associated with blood, life force, and renewal, encased in a sealed stone chamber, and surrounded by ceremonial offerings. Among the objects buried with her were bone needles and obsidian blades, tools potentially linked to auto-sacrifice, suggesting she either performed rituals in life or that these rites were symbolically reenacted at her burial. Her jade funerary mask, assembled from delicate tiles to mimic her facial contours, served not merely as ornamentation, but as a metaphysical instrument. In Maya belief, the face was the mirror of the soul, and preserving that visage helped the gods recognize and receive the spirit in the afterlife. Ceramic vessels, still sealed after more than a millennium, likely once held maize gruel, cacao, pulque, or other sacred substances intended to nourish the soul in its next life. Stingray spines, shell trumpets, and other ritual items found in the tomb may have functioned as spiritual instruments, calls to the divine, tokens of communion with the gods. To the Maya, burial was never a conclusion. It was the planting of a seed, the beginning of transformation. Kings and queens were earthly embodiments of cosmic forces, and death returned them to their divine origins. The Red Queen, bathed in red, entombed in sacred stone, and revered with offerings, was not being put to rest. She was being prepared for rebirth. Her interment wasn't just a farewell. It was a coronation for the afterlife. Just steps away from her tomb lies one of the most revered burial sites in Mesoamerican archaeology, the tomb of Kinich Janab Pakal, inside the Grand Temple of the Inscriptions. His crypt, adorned with one of the most iconic sarcophagus lids ever discovered, depicting his descent into the underworld and ultimate rebirth, has long been a symbol of Maya funerary cosmology. But it is the Red Queen's burial, so close and so deliberately aligned, that adds an extraordinary layer to this sacred geography. Her sarcophagus inside Temple 13 is more than just adjacent. It is spiritually entwined. In Palenque, where architecture followed celestial patterns and divine logic, this proximity is no accident. It is a coded statement of royal partnership and cosmic duality. While the Red Queen's name remains lost to time, the mirroring of her burial with Pakal's strongly suggests she was his queen, most likely Lady Tsakbu Ajao, a noblewoman of high lineage who married into Palenque's royal house. Both were buried in pyramids, both encased in cinnabar, both surrounded by jade and ritual objects, together composing two halves of a cosmic story. Pakal's tomb tells of the sun's descent and return. The Red Queen's, though more subtle, may represent the moon, mysterious, cyclical, equally vital to the divine balance. Together, they represent the sacred duality at the heart of Maya belief: masculine and feminine, life and death, day and night, king and queen. In Maya mythology, power was never a singular force. It was a balance, shared, channeled, and preserved through ritual and architecture. The Red Queen, though voiceless in glyphs, speaks through stone, through design, and through the deliberate silence of her tomb. She was not forgotten. She was transformed. The legacy of the Red Queen was never meant to stand alone, because in Maya belief, rulership was never singular. It was relational. Harmony in the cosmos required balance, and that balance extended beyond the stars and into the royal court. By placing the Red Queen's tomb beside that of King Pakal, the Maya weren't just honoring a royal consort, they were preserving a sacred duality. Theirs was a cosmic partnership, a reflection of divine order itself. Their nearness in death echoed their shared influence in life. She wasn't behind the king, she was beside him. Not an accessory to his power, but an extension of it. Together they ruled not only a kingdom but a sacred legacy. Their tombs do not speak in inscriptions, but they speak nonetheless. They whisper through silence, through the crimson hue of cinnabar, through the cold stone that encases them, through the deliberate architecture that holds their memory intact. These are two souls forever entwined, buried in purpose and enshrined in eternity, one of history's most profound and sacred silences. Though her name has been lost to time, the Red Queen of Palanque endures, not as a forgotten relic of the past, but as one of the most mysterious, powerful women in the ancient world. Her resting place, sealed for over 13 centuries, now speaks across the ages. Her story, though fragmented, is etched in the reverence of her burial, the richness of her offerings, the precision of her tomb's construction, the symbolism of her crimson-stained bones. All of it points to someone who was far more than a wife or consort. She was a woman of royal blood, spiritual authority, and immense influence. Today, the Red Queen challenges the way we see ancient Maya history. She forces us to reconsider long-held assumptions, reminding us that women in that world were not silent or secondary. They performed sacred rites, ruled alongside kings, guided dynasties, and bridged the earthly and divine. While Pakal's name is carved in stone and echoed in history books, the Red Queen reemerges from the shadows as a quiet but undeniable force, proof that power flowed through the veins of mothers, queens, priestesses, and visionaries. Her legacy is not only in the precious jade or ceremonial objects she was buried with. It lives in the questions she inspires, in the careful symmetry of Temple 13, in every grain of cinnabar that once coated her bones, in every layer of stone that encased her body with reverent intention. This woman mattered, and perhaps that is the most powerful part of her story. Not just what we have uncovered, but what remains unknown. The Red Queen reminds us that history is not merely a record of dates and names. It is a living puzzle, an emotional and spiritual connection between past and present. Her influence didn't end in death. She lies enrobed in red, the color of life, sacrifice, blood, and rebirth. Her jade mask, once a spiritual shield between her soul and the afterlife, now becomes a mirror reflecting back at us our endless curiosity. Her face, once hidden in silence, now speaks through archaeology, through art, through wonder. She remains nameless, yet not voiceless, mysterious, but not forgotten. The Red Queen may have ruled a kingdom in life, but in death, she commands something far more enduring, our imagination. Her tomb was sealed in stone, her name withheld by history, and still, she speaks. The iron handrail tore through her left hip, crashing through flesh and bone before emerging from her pelvis with brutal force. Her spinal column fractured in not one, but 3 devastating places, shattering the very core of her body's support. Her right leg was reduced to splinters, a jagged mess of broken bones. The bones in her foot dislocated with a sickening twist, while her collarbone snapped under the impact, ribs fracturing like brittle twigs around her chest. Her shoulder was violently dislocated, hanging limply as if no longer connected to her. To make matters worse, her abdomen was pierced, a deep wound that threatened the very essence of her life. She was only 18 years old. In the chaotic aftermath, a stranger draped a borrowed overcoat across her battered form, offering a fragile shield against the cold and the cruel eyes of onlookers. But something extraordinary caught the attention of another witness. Her body wasn't just wounded, it sparkled, not with the dark, crimson stains of blood alone, but with a shimmering dust of gold powder she had been carrying in a small pouch. On impact, the pouch had exploded, showering her broken figure with what looked like glittering ash, turning tragedy into a haunting spectacle. Frida was rushed to the Red Cross hospital, where she faced a grueling series of surgeries that stretched over months. Weeks passed with her trapped inside a heavy body cast, lying completely flat on her back, immobilized and writhing in agony. Infections gnawed at her body. Uncertainty clouded her mind. The dreams she had harbored, to become a doctor, to heal others, slipped further and further out of reach with each passing day. Yet, amid the suffocating stillness of her immobilization, something remarkable began to awaken within her. Her father, sensing her despair, brought her a set of brushes. Her mother engineered a special easel that hung above her bed, allowing her to reach out to a new world beyond her confinement. A mirror was hung from the canopy overhead, so she could see herself, her own reflection becoming her only companion. And so, there she lay, in plaster and steel, a fragile body locked in battle with itself, and she began to paint. At first, it was out of sheer boredom, a distraction from the endless pain, but soon painting became an obsession, a vital lifeline. Her first subjects were the only things she could access: her own face, her own body, her own soul. It wasn't vanity that drove her, it was survival. The accident had shattered her physically, but it also opened a doorway into her own mind and body, into the complex, surreal language of pain and identity that would come to define her art. The girl who once dreamed of healing others was now healing herself, one brushstroke at a time. Enclosed within plaster and steel, Frida Kahlo's body was fighting a war with every breath. Yet her spirit found refuge in painting, a language that blossomed from the depths of her pain. This language was deeply personal, brutally honest, and often raw to the point of discomfort, which was exactly the intention. Frida did not paint pretty flowers or serene landscapes. She painted pain, her pain, physical, emotional, and existential. Her earliest works were small, painted on humble surfaces, like tin or wood panels. They drew inspiration from Mexican retablos, devotional paintings traditionally created to tell stories of suffering and miracles. But Frida turned this tradition inward. Her own body became the canvas, her emotions the altar. She depicted herself as fragmented, pierced, bleeding, sometimes impaled by nails like a martyr in a modern crucifixion. In another haunting image, she floats in a barren landscape, tethered to a broken column, a striking metaphor for her shattered spine. She painted herself weeping, fractured, decapitated, and exposed, but never as a helpless victim. Instead, she was always watchful, defiant, present. Her pain was not softened or sanitized. She confronted trauma's ugliness with a mixture of beauty, defiance, and even dark humor. Each painting was a reclamation, a fierce statement of her body, her experience, and her identity as a woman in a world that often sought to define her by others' terms. But Frida was doing more than just telling her story. She was inventing a new visual language. Her work blended Mexican folk art, surrealism, medical illustration, and rich symbolism into dreamlike autopsies of the soul, framed by culture, color, and myth. By the time she recovered enough to walk again, painfully and slowly, Frida was no longer the girl who dreamed of becoming a doctor. She had become an artist, and her art was unlike anything the world had ever seen. She had transformed the worst thing that had ever happened to her into a source of creation and power. Frida Kahlo didn't just paint her pain. She demanded that the world see it, and in doing so, she transformed suffering into a sacred act of self-expression. In 1928, still convalescing, still painting, and just 21 years old, Frida met the man who would become the most profound and tumultuous relationship of her life, Diego Rivera. He was 20 years her senior and already Mexico's most famous painter, a towering figure in both physical presence and artistic legacy. Rivera was a giant of Mexican muralism, known for his vast, politically charged frescoes that told the epic story of the Mexican people. Frida had admired his work from afar, but now, armed with her own paintings, she sought his judgment. Interrupting his work at the Ministry of Education, she asked him bluntly, "Do I have talent?" Diego looked at her paintings and answered simply, "Yes," and not just out of kindness. He recognized in her something rare, a raw, unfiltered voice full of rage, irony, pain, and beauty. Their relationship began, intense, consuming, creative. Frida would later say, "I suffered 2 accidents in my life. One was when a streetcar knocked me down. The other was Diego." They married in 1929, beginning a partnership that would forever shape both their lives and legacies. Frida Kahlo's relationship with Diego Rivera was a pairing that outsiders often found puzzling: a massive, politically famous man and a sharp-tongued, fiercely independent woman who was already walking with a cane. Her parents once called their union a marriage between an elephant and a dove. Their bond was passionate but chaotic. Diego supported Frida's art and encouraged her growth as a painter, yet he was relentlessly unfaithful, even with Frida's own sister, Christina. Devastated, Frida responded by taking lovers of her own, both men and women, including rumored affairs with Leon Trotsky and painter Georgia O'Keeffe. They divorced in 1939, only to remarry a year later under very different terms. This time, Frida retained her autonomy, her home, her money, and her name. Their second marriage was less about traditional love and more about creative partnership and mutual understanding. Despite the betrayals and heartbreak, Diego remained a constant force in Frida's life. He challenged her, wounded her, but also believed in her as an artist, a revolutionary, and a woman redefining what painting could be. Together, they were anything but peaceful, but undeniably legendary. In the 1930s, Frida followed Diego north to San Francisco, Detroit, and New York as he completed high-profile mural commissions. These years abroad confronted her with American industrialism, wealth, and the contradictions of capitalism, experiences that deeply unsettled her politically. A proud Mexican nationalist, committed communist, and admirer of indigenous traditions, Frida grew disillusioned by the opulence she witnessed in the U.S., especially during the Great Depression. In letters home, she mocked American materialism and obsession with appearances, longing instead for the grit, color, and contradictions of Mexico. While Diego painted massive murals on factory walls, Frida began creating smaller, quieter revolutions, deeply personal works on tin and canvas. Her style solidified, sharp, surreal, emotional, and intimate. It was during this time that she produced some of her most iconic self-portraits. Frida didn't paint herself out of vanity. She painted to survive. Her identity became her landscape. With her body constantly in pain from a childhood accident, multiple surgeries, and a failed pregnancy in Detroit, she turned inward. Her portraits revealed her bleeding, fragmented, exposed self, but her face remained calm, direct, and unapologetic. One of her most powerful works, Henry Ford Hospital, shows Frida lying on a hospital bed, crying, surrounded by floating symbols of loss: a fetus, a snail, medical equipment, a cracked pelvis. Raw, graphic, and deeply emotional, the canvas bled with truth. Back in Mexico, Frida immersed herself in leftist politics. She and Diego welcomed Leon Trotsky into their home while he lived in exile. Frida's choice to wear traditional Tijuana dresses and indigenous garments was more than fashion. It was a political and cultural statement. Her art was inseparable from her beliefs, her identity, her body, and her ideology all intertwined. While Rivera painted murals of revolution, Frida painted its human cost: the body in pieces, the mind on fire, the self always staring back. In exile and illness, she became not just a painter of pain, but a painter of resistance. Returning to Mexico in the late 1930s, Frida was no longer just Diego Rivera's wife. She was a force unto herself, an artist whose work radiated raw honesty, surreal symbolism, and cultural identity. At her Casa Azul in Coyoacan, a sanctuary of color and contradiction, she lived fully as herself. Bright cobalt walls, yellow trim, Aztec statues in the garden, monkeys and parrots wandering freely. The house was a living extension of her imagination, blending tradition and rebellion, elegance and earth. Surrounded by pre-Columbian artifacts, folk art, and revolutionary books, she painted amid the scent of copal incense and the sounds of mariachi outside. This period marked a surge of creativity. Her paintings grew more intricate, symbolic, and political. Works like the two Fridas revealed a divided self, one in European dress with a bleeding heart, the other in indigenous clothing, strong and composed. It was her visual autobiography, a portrait of love, loss, and heritage. In 1939, she exhibited her work in Paris, where artists like Picasso, Breton, and Kandinsky praised her fiercely original style. Yet even among surrealists, Frida stood apart. When André Breton labeled her a surrealist, she pushed back. "They thought I was a surrealist," she said, "but I wasn't. I never painted dreams. I painted my own reality." She painted Mexico, not the romantic postcard version, but the living, breathing country she loved. Her work pulsed with symbolism: skeletons, hummingbirds, hearts, thorns, corn, and blood. She honored the indigenous roots of her homeland while unmasking its violence. Despite her growing artistic voice, Frida's health deteriorated. Multiple surgeries, infections, and chronic pain became her daily reality. Still, she painted, propped up in bed, torso bound in corsets, fingers clenched around her brush. She had returned to Mexico not to rest, but to reclaim her power through paint, politics, and fearless self-expression. Through the 1940s, Frida's body continued to betray her. Her spine deteriorated, her right leg constantly infected. She underwent over 30 surgeries, often back-to-back. At times bedridden for months, encased in body casts or immobilized by traction devices stretching her bones, she never stopped painting. Each canvas was both release and resistance. Her works grew darker, more defiant, painted with clarity, sharpened by pain. In the broken column, she presents herself split down the middle, pierced with nails, a cracked ionic column replacing her spine. Yet her face remained stoic, gaze unflinching. Pain became her constant companion, antagonist, and muse. Her political voice grew louder as well. She joined the Mexican Communist Party, marched in demonstrations, wrote fiery letters, and condemned imperialism and injustice. When she could no longer walk, she protested in a wheelchair, defiantly holding signs and shouting slogans. In 1953, Frida had her first solo exhibition in Mexico, a long overdue celebration of her art. Her health was so fragile, doctors said she couldn't attend, but she did what only Frida could, arriving by ambulance, carried on a stretcher, placed at the gallery's center on her hospital bed. Dressed in traditional finery, surrounded by her work, she greeted guests with tequila, laughter, and that fiery spark in her eyes. Her final paintings were both childlike and harrowing. In Marxism, Will Give Health to the Sick, she painted herself wearing a steel corset, cradled by Marx's hands casting away oppression's symbols. Her last known work was a still life of sliced watermelons, one piece bearing the words, "Viva la vida," long live life. Even facing death, she remained defiant, joyful, and political. Frida Kahlo died on July 13, 1954, at age 47, in the same place she was born, La Casa Azul in Coyoacán. The official cause was a pulmonary embolism, but those close to her whispered of something deeper: exhaustion from pain, surgeries, and a long war with her own body. Just days before, she had attended a political protest against the CIA coup in Guatemala, weak and wheelchair-bound, fist raised in the air. Revolution was her final heartbeat. Her last diary entry was brief and piercing. "I hope the exit is joyful, and I hope never to return." Her funeral at the Palacio de Bellas Artes, Mexico's most prestigious cultural institution, was attended by friends, family, artists, and revolutionaries. Draped in the red flag of the Mexican Communist Party, her body was watched over with love and respect. Diego Rivera was inconsolable, calling her the greatest love of his life, even after his betrayals nearly broke her. In the years following her death, something extraordinary happened. Frida Kahlo refused to fade away. At first, her name was whispered in art circles, her work too political for surrealists, too surreal for traditionalists. But through the 1970s and 80s, as feminist scholars and activists reclaimed forgotten voices, Frida's story grew louder. She became more than a painter. She became a symbol of pain transformed into beauty, feminism born through resistance, Mexican identity celebrated without apology, queerness, disability, revolution, and authenticity. Her unibrow, gaze, and flowers in her hair became iconic. Her home turned museum, her diary a sacred text, and her paintings now hang in the world's greatest galleries. Though she spent much of her life in Diego's shadow, in death, Frida stepped forward. She left behind more than paintings. She left a mirror, daring us to look not with pity or fear, but with fire. Today, her face is everywhere, on t-shirts, murals, dolls, memes, posters, and icons. Her legacy isn't just recognition, it's recognition of truth. Frida never sought to be flawless. She didn't fit into boxes or conform. In a world demanding perfection, she gave us realness, raw, messy, vibrant, angry, joyful, and contradictory realness. She celebrated what made her different, her disability, queerness, politics, and culture, transforming it into art that transcended borders and decades. She's become a global icon of defiance, feminism, cultural pride, and creative resistance. For queer communities, she is a fearless bisexual icon, living unapologetically in a time demanding silence. For women, a reminder that power doesn't need permission. For disabled artists, proof that pain can fuel the brush, not stop it. And for Mexico, a reclaimed daughter, fierce, folkloric, and forever part of the national soul. Her paintings, once dismissed as strange or too personal, are now deeply revered. Works like the two Fridas, Self-Portrait with Thorn Necklace and Hummingbird, and The Broken Column resonate with anyone who has suffered and transformed that suffering into something sacred. Frida lived in the margins and made them center stage. She embraced contradiction. A communist who wore gold, a woman betrayed who loved again, a body in pieces with an unbreakable soul. Through it all, she painted not just with color, but with conviction. Frida Kahlo never asked to be a symbol. She simply told the truth about herself. In doing so, she spoke for millions who had never seen themselves reflected in art before. When we see her face today, we see courage, we see color, we see resistance, we see Frida, not gone, but immortal.